Hey guys, Prowl 1701 here, and today on It's Armageddon, we're going to be talking about 70's Doctor Who. And this time, it's going to be what if you had to sacrifice half of the stories from a season. The aliens are back. They're demanding half of the episodes of each season of 70's Doctor Who. And this time, unlike the 60s where they let us keep the majority in seasons that had odd-numbered stories, this time they're going to take the extra ones. So if a story has, if a season has 5 stories, they're taking 3 of them. So instead of being nice and giving us the extra story, they're going to be taking it this time. I had to do the video like this. I had to do the setup like this because it was too easy to do it if they only took 2 out of the 5. It became way too easy, and the video is less fun, in my opinion, that way. So for the purposes of this video, let's say that because they let us keep the odd number out in the 60s, when they were picking the 60 seasons, this time they're going to take the extra one. And we're going to start... Ever had one of those days where you just feel like you didn't fully wake up? Like part of you's just still in the bed going, ah, and the rest of you's jealous? So we're going to start with Season 7. And luckily, this only has 4 stories, so they can only take 2. And of course, this one's kind of easy. I'm going to give them Silurians and Ambassadors of Death. And while I enjoy those 2 stories, they are the easy choices for me. I love Spearhead from Space. I think it's important. I think you have to keep it. And then, of course, Inferno, widely regarded one of John Pertwee's best stories, often his best story. Usually the only one I see it battling with for his best story is the Daemons. And obviously, Inferno's just a better story. And it's perfectly balanced at 7 parts. I absolutely love Inferno. So that's just an easy one for me to choose. Never drink a huge sip of soda pop right before you start a video. I'm going to follow that advice by drinking some soda pop. American logic. So I would give up Silurians and Ambassadors of Death, keep Spearhead from Space and Inferno. I feel like that's an easy choice. I feel like a lot of you down in the comments will probably make the same choice. Season 8, it gets a little trickier. In Season 8 where I realized that for the seasons that have an odd number amount of stories, we have to let the aliens take the odd number one out just to make the video interesting. Because I knew immediately I would give up Claws of Axos. It's just my least favorite Pertwee story. And while I still enjoy it, I don't think Pertwee has any bad stories. It's my least favorite. And then I would also give up Colony in Space. And that's definitely a situation where I actually like Colony in Space. I actually prefer Colony in Space over the Daemons. But I recognize that the Daemons is a more popular story. And that my love for Colony in Space is not as common as people's love for the Daemons is. That I'm kind of the oddball out and preferring Colony. So I would give up Colony in Space. Where it gets tricky is the 3rd one, because the other stories left are so good. Terror of the Autons, The Mind of Evil, and the Daemons are good stories and popular stories, and it's harder to pick between them. I ended up saying, writing on my list, that I would give up Terror of the Autons, which is very hard for me. It's the Master's first story. Delgado is just on fire in it. It really establishes the chemistry between the 3rd Doctor and Delgado's Master very well. The Autons are good in it. Not as good as they were in the last story, but they're still good in it. And I enjoy it. So it's really hard to let it go. But I love The Mind of Evil. I think it's a phenomenally good story. It's my favorite story of the season. And then The Daemons is such a classic. And it's got so much of the Pertwee era tropes going on in it in a good way that I think those are the 2 I would save. The Daemons because I feel obligated to, and Mind of Evil just because I love it, that I would have to sacrifice Terror of the Autons. And it breaks my heart to say that. But that's again why the aliens get the odd numbered out for this video, just to make the video more interesting and kind of harder to think on what you would keep and what you wouldn't. For Season 9, I would probably sacrifice the Mutants and the Time Monster, which I enjoy those stories. I like Season 9. I find it underrated. But I know the Time Monster and the Mutants aren't the most popular stories. And again, it is kind of a situation where I'm having to keep stuff not just for me. It's not a you know, what do you take down to the bunker video, which is more what I personally want, and this is more of a, I'm having to negotiate on behalf of the whole planet, you know, no pressure. And so I would keep, I would sacrifice the mutants and the time monster. It gets a little tricky after that, because I know I'm keeping Day of the Daleks, because I just love Day of the Daleks. And everyone else is just going to have to settle for loving Day of the Daleks, because I'm keeping Day of the Daleks. It's which one do you keep between Curse of Peladon and Sea Devils? And that is a tricky one. And there was definitely a time when I would have kept the Sea Devils, but the last couple watch-throughs, I like the Sea Devils, but I'm not quite as enamored with it as I used to be, whereas my love for Curse has kind of grown a bit. So I actually think I would keep Curse over the Sea Devils. That could change. And again, why the aliens had to keep the odd numbered out on this list, or else everyone would, if the aliens only had to take 2 stories from this season, everyone would just write the mutants and the time monster. They really wouldn't have to think on it, and it would be done. Doing it where they take 3, I feel like makes it harder here, which is good, which is the kind of thought and, you know, that I want someone to put into something like this, and that I want to put into this. So I would probably give up the Sea Devils and keep Curse of Peladon, and Curse of Peladon and Day of the Daleks would be the 2 stories I kept. Season 10, also another one where it's easy for me to pick 2, it's hard for me to pick 3 to sacrifice. Like, if I only had to sacrifice 2, I know it's Frontier in Space and Planet of the Daleks. Those are my 2 least favorite stories of the season. It's easy. It's when you have to ask me to sacrifice that 3rd one it becomes hard. Because Season 10 is such a good season. And don't get me wrong, I like Frontier in Space a lot too. It just has that abrupt ending because it has to tie into Planet of the Daleks. Planet of the Daleks I'm actually not very fond of. I'm starting to think I might like Claws of Axos more than Planet of the Daleks, to be honest. But Planet of the Daleks is fine. I just don't think it's that good. But the other 3 stories I like. I really like The 3 Doctors. I really like Carnival of Monsters, possibly Pertwee's most underrated story. And I really like The Green Death. And I really think The Green Death is important to the show. It's a very well-known story. The one with the maggots, a lot of people remember it. It has some pretty good special effects. A few naff special effects, but some pretty good special effects. And one of the best companion departures. So it's really hard to pick that 3rd one. I actually wrote down The Green Death when I was making this list and chose to keep The 3 Doctors and Carnival of Monsters. And if I was doing the bunker scenario, that's definitely the way I would go, because I love Carnival of Monsters. I like Green Death, but I'm not quite as enamored with it as I used to be. I do have childhood memories of it. It is one of those classic Who stories I did see as a child growing up, so I have that nostalgic attachment to it. But I'm not quite as enamored with it as I used to be. It's good, and still got one of the best companion departures. But I much prefer The 3 Doctors, my favorite multi-doctor story. And I love Carnival of Monsters. Bob Holmes. And you guys know I love Robert Holmes. The best writer the show has ever had. And again, I find Carnival of Monsters possibly the most underrated Pertwee story. For some reason, it just doesn't show up in conversations with stuff like Spearhead, The 3 Doctors, The Daemons, Inferno, The Time Warrior. And it should, because it's just as good. It's a really, really, really well-paced 4-parter with some good guest cast, some great writing, some good dialogue, and the dress sheiks are fantastic. Fantastic design and execution, and I love that sound they make. It's a really good story. It gets a little harder when I'm in this situation of negotiating, because I know I'm keeping The 3 Doctors. I know that. It comes down to Carnival of Monsters and The Green Death. And I don't know which way I would go in this situation. Like, I might just say The Green Death because it is more famous, it has a companion departure, and I feel like that's the one the masses would want to keep. Yeah, that's actually a good question for the comments. If you had to choose between keeping Carnival of Monsters and The Green Death, which one would you keep and why? And does it vary on if you're picking as the representative of the planet for the only story the whole planet gets to keep, and which one would you pick in the bunker scenario where it's just for your own pleasure? You know, are you picking one because you like it better or one because you think it's more important historically for Doctor Who? That is a really hard choice. That's something to mention down in the comments. I might actually go The Green Death and sacrifice Carnival of Monsters in this situation just because I think it's a more important story. But if it was for my own personal pleasure in the bunker, Carnival of Monsters every time. That's a really hard one. And I'm definitely keeping the 3 Doctors. And then for season 11, I would sacrifice, what did I write? Where did my list go? There we go. Monster of Peladon, which I like. I like all of season 11, all the stories to one degree or another. Matter of fact, one of the stories I'm keeping is possibly my least favorite story of the season. We'll get to that. Monsters of Peladon I would sacrifice, which is a shame, because I love how well Sarah's written in it. I feel like Sarah Jane Smith, who is my favorite companion, one of the most famous companions of the show, is written better in this story than she is in almost any other story she's in, especially in classic Doctor Who. I a lot of times feel like Sarah got written better with John than she did with Tom, even sometimes. But just her character development and the way she acts here and her independence is something the character loses as we get into more and more into the Hinchcliffe era, which is unfortunate. I love her performance here. I do enjoy the story. I don't know if it needed to be 6 parts, but I enjoy the story. I like some of the cliffhangers. I love the guy playing the engineer you never trust. He's also in, I think he might also be in the Space Pirates, actually. He looks familiar. He's definitely in some other Doctor Who's. He's a really good actor, though. I knew when I saw him, like, I don't trust that guy. And then the actress playing the princess. Basically David Troughton's daughter, or David Troughton's character from Curse's daughter. I enjoy the story, but it would have to go, since technically I can only keep 2. It would be one of the ones that have to go. I would sacrifice Death to the Daleks. Again, you guys, if you watch my channel a lot, you know I love Death to the Daleks. It's an underrated story. The underrated Dalek story. Well, it and Destiny, really. It's a lot of fun. It's got its flaws, but I enjoy it a lot. And then as much as it pains me to do so, I would sacrifice Invasion of the Dinosaurs, which, again, in Invasion of the Dinosaurs, we can sum up easily. Yes, some, not all, some of the dinosaur effects look a bit naffed, but the story makes up for it. It's a really well done story. But I have to keep the Time Warrior, because I love the Time Warrior. I think it's the best story of the season. It's the only Jon Pertwee historical. I think Sarah Jane is never written better, definitely never written better in classic Doctor Who than she is here. Arguably, this is just the best she's written, period. Even though I do think the modern series and her spinoff show did a lot of good stuff with her. But I enjoy the location work. I enjoy the introduction of the Sontarans. I love the human antagonist. I like him a lot. He's played really well. And again, it's Robert Holmes. I absolutely adore Robert Holmes' writing in Doctor Who. He has such good dialogue. So I love the Time Warrior. And then Planet of the Spiders, which is not my favorite of the season, honestly. Possibly my least favorite of the season. But I would like to keep it because it is the regeneration story. And it does have good elements in it. I love the extended chase in it. I like the confrontation at the end with it. I probably would keep it because I feel obligated to keep it. Moving into Tom Baker with season 12. I would definitely, again, this is another situation where if I only had to sacrifice 2, it's easy. Very easy. I would sacrifice Sontaran Experiment, which I like. Sontaran Experiment is an excellent 2-parter that knows it only needs to be a 2-parter. At 4 parts, it probably would have felt drawn out, but it's great as a 2-parter. I enjoy it. It is the weakest story of the season for me, but I enjoy it. Next, as much as it pains me, I would sacrifice Revenge of the Cybermen. I do think it's an underrated story. I think it could be the underrated story of classic Doctor Who. I feel like it doesn't get the attention it deserves. It has its problems. It does have a planet-sized plot hole, let's be honest, with the Vogons not using gold against the Cybermen. And I've talked about this before, huge plot hole. But I do enjoy it. I love Tom's performance in it. I love the fact the Doctor is having no crap from the aliens in it. And I love the location work in the caves. But I would have to sacrifice it. And again, those are easy choices. It's the third one for me that's hard, because I love Robot. Just on a personal level, I love Robot. And then I love the Ark in Space and Genesis. Those two are classics. And Ark in Space, of course, being one of the earliest memories I have of Doctor Who. And being the very first Doctor Who story I ever owned. I bought it on DVD back in the 2000s. The very first Doctor Who story I ever owned. I guess aside from the TV movie, which I recorded when it originally aired in the States, I recorded it on a blank tape. But the first one I ever purchased and owned, that makes more sense. But I would probably sacrifice Robot, and that's hard for me because if you've been with the channel a while, I've talked about Robot. Robot is kind of the definition of, a lot of times I mention how I very much consider, if I'm ranking something, of what I think is the best and what I think is my favorite. Those aren't necessarily the same things. I don't consider best and favorite to be pseudonyms for each other. I consider, if I'm ranking like top 10, if I'm ranking the best regeneration stories, that is an objective list. Like, I'm trying to be as objective as one can. Objectively, which regeneration stories or post-regeneration stories I think are the best. Whereas if I say my favorite post-regeneration stories, those are going to be subjectively the ones I like most for various reasons. And those are different for me. I've talked about this on the channel before, whereas I objectively think The 11th Hour is the best post-regeneration story. It just fires on all cylinders. It's really well made. Whereas my favorite post-regeneration story is Robot. I just have a lot of nostalgic attachment for that. And that makes it harder to be the one to sacrifice, but I would, because, again, I'm picking for everyone, and I feel like Genesis, you have to keep Genesis. I mean, you just have to. I mean, if you can only keep one story from this season, it has to be Genesis, because it's Genesis. So Genesis, of course, was always going to be one of the ones I kept. You have to keep Genesis. And then the other one for me is The Ark in Space. I do think it is a classic. It's regarded as a classic for a reason. It's a very well done story. Again, kind of Alien before Alien, which I like. Good performances, a nice set design, and it has a nice creepiness to it, especially watching it as a child. Just watching Noah slowly transform into this thing as a child was creepy, and my mind really filled the blanks in on the special effects, because I saw The Ark in Space, I think, more than once when I was a kid, but I didn't see it again for a long time until I bought it on DVD. And it's amazing when I went back and looked how much of the blanks and the special effects my mind had filled in. But I still enjoy it. So objectively, I feel like it should be the other one to save. And subjectively, because I have such an enjoyment for it, it's the one I would save. So Genesis and The Ark in Space for me. Moving into season 13, where, of course, there are 6 stories, so we can keep half of them. I would sacrifice the android invasion, because I do feel it's the weakest link of the season, while still being good. Make no bones about it. Season 13 has no bad stories. They're all good. They're all very good. Like, there's no even just good stories. They're all really good, great stories. I mean, it's a phenomenal season. Season 13 is probably objectively the best season the show has ever done. And seasons 12 and 13 are definitely my 2 favorites. But I think the android invasion, relative to the rest of the season, is the weakest. Next, I would sacrifice Brain of Morbius. This one doesn't quite measure up as much to me as it used to. It's good. Again, I like it even better than Android Invasion, which I still like. It's a great take on a Frankenstein story. A good way of taking something that exists like Frankenstein and remixing it for Doctor Who and making it feel fresh and original. Like, you can tell it's doing its own thing from Frankenstein, but it's doing enough with it to where I don't feel like it's just a cheap copy of Frankenstein. I enjoy the set design. I enjoy the cast. I enjoy the performances from the main cast and the guest cast. And then I like the mind-bending contest at the end. It's a good story, but I would sacrifice it because there's so much more I would want to keep. And again, those are kind of easy for me. It's that third choice where it really gets hard, because these other 4 stories are so top-notch. You have Terror of the Zygons, which is a classic, Planet of Evil, which is probably the underrated story of the season. I really love Planet of Evil. Pyramids of Mars, which is just top 10, one of the greatest Doctor Who stories ever made, and Seeds of Doom, which would easily be Tom's best season finale if Talons didn't exist. They're close. Seeds of Doom is a classic. Though I do feel I should point out, I think the first 2 episodes of Seeds of Doom are a little better than the rest of it. I think the whole story is good. I have little nitpicks about it, like none of the unit regulars showing up I've talked about before. But I don't quite feel like episodes 4, 5, 3, 4, 5, and 6 are quite that God tier level that the first 2 episodes are. The one I would actually get rid of, and I know a lot of people would disagree, is I would probably get rid of Terror of the Zygons. Not that it's bad by any means. Terror of the Zygons is fantastic. It's a really good story. It's the fact I love the other 3 so much. I mean, Pyramids I have to keep. I love Pyramids of Mars. It's one of my favorite Doctor Who stories of all time. It is a classic. I always appreciate, I believe Colin sent it. One of my patrons, Colin Coney, I believe, sent me my DVD of it. It was the only season 13 story I didn't have. Because it's a little pricey these days for Region 1. Although, keep in mind, I have a region-free player, so I can, if anyone ever wants to send any, I can watch Region 2 DVDs. I have a region-free player. So if you ever have some Region 2 DVDs you want to get rid of, send them on to me. I like collecting them. If you've been collecting the collection sets and just want to get rid of some of your Region 2 DVDs, send them on. I'd love to have them. I actually have them on display right here out of camera range. You can't see it, but they're down here. But I have to keep Pyramids of Mars. I really appreciate Colin sending that as well. It's just such a good story. I love Sutekh. I absolutely adore Gabriel Wolf in that role. I love everything about this story. It's so good. And then Seeds of Doom I feel like I have to keep because, again, I feel like it's a classic. And then I can't get rid of Planet of Evil. I love Planet of Evil. I know a lot of people, if they had to get rid of half of Season 13, Planet of Evil would probably be on their list. To be fair, there's some of you that would probably keep Android Invasion. I know there's lots of people out there that love Android Invasion. I think a lot of you would agree with me that this is the season where it's really hard to choose because all the stories are so good. So sacrificing half of them is hard to do. But I can't get rid of Planet of Evil. I love that story. And then the rest of the world's just going to have to love that story too, because I would be getting rid of Terror of the Zygons instead. Season 14, and I have to turn the page. Here we go. Season of the 14 is a little tricky because, as I've taught before on the channel, even recently, I considered Season 14 to be a little overrated. Could be considerably overrated, really. It's still a good season, but I'm not as enamored with the stories this season, most of them, with the only true masterpiece in this one being Talons for me. And of course, I'm keeping Talons. They're not getting Talons. But there are other stories that are well thought of this season that I would get rid of that I think a lot of people would not be happy about. The first one to go would probably be, whatever. Where's it at? I can't read my hand. Oh, Hand of Fear would definitely go. Just because it falls apart in episode 4. I like the first 3 episodes. I know it's Sarah's departure, and her departure scene is beautiful. But that episode 4, it just kind of loses me. It's my least favorite story of the season. It would have to go. Next on the list would be Robots of Death. Which is hard for me because I love the production design. I love the robot design. One of the best robot designs Doctor Who has ever done, if not the best. And I love the ship design a lot, the interior of the ship. But I don't care for the story. It's a story I always feel is overrated, so massively overrated, that I feel like the fandom could get along without it. It would be one I gave up. Now, the other one for me is hard. This is another situation where it's easy for me to pick 2. It's hard for me to pick 3. I would probably give up Mask of Mandragora, which is a shame because I love Mask of Mandragora. I think it's an underrated story. It kind of falls apart a little with its easy ending, but I do really enjoy it a lot. It's very well cast, and I love the location shooting. I would keep Face of Evil because I think it's a great introduction story for Leela. It's got a couple little naff parts, but I think it's a really good story. And I would keep Deadly Assassin, even though, as most of you know, I consider it a very overrated story. But I think it's an important story, especially being the only Classic Who story where the Doctor doesn't have a companion and he's kind of on his own. I feel like that merits saving it. Plus, it does do some trippy stuff in the Matrix as well. While I'm not enamored with that stuff, I know a lot of people are. So I would keep Deadly Assassin. So I would give up Mask of Mandragora, though it pains me. Robots of Death, though it doesn't really pain me. And Hand of Fear, which also doesn't really pain me. I mean, naturally, I wouldn't want to lose any Doctor Who stories, but I wouldn't lose sleep at night over the last 2 like I would the first one. Season 15, moving into the Williams era. I would give up Invasion of Time, which Invasion of Time with the updated effects really helps it and makes it much more watchable because, I mean, it's just so obvious the budget ran out. here at the end, and the original effects are very problematic sometimes, especially with the Vorons or whatever they're called, the people who invade before the Suntarans do. I'm terrible with names. You know, I never really got to watch the updated effects version until we got the season 15 box set this year, and it was nice to be able to see it with the updated effects. I do think they help it, but it is, I think, Tom's weakest season finale, honestly. Not kind of weird because season 17, it kind of depends on if you count Horns of Nymon as the season finale or not. But I still like Horns more than I do Invasion of Time because Horns is just more fun. And I personally count Shadow as the season finale now that it's complete and it was supposed to be. So I still say Invasion is the weakest season finale. I would also give up the Invisible Enemy. That one just doesn't do a lot for me. I think it's more famous for being the introduction of K9 than it is for being a good story. Although I do like having K9 introduced. I do enjoy seeing Michael Sheard again. I always enjoy seeing Michael Sheard in Doctor Who. And then, of course, I like the guy playing K9's inventor. I like the character and the actor. I think they're both very good in this. But there's just so many stories I do like this season, I could let that one go. Because, of course, I know I'm keeping Fang Rock. And I know I'm keeping Image of the Findal. The trickiest part is here at the end on whether to keep Sunmakers or Underworld. Because I love them both, honestly. I would probably keep Sunmakers, mainly just because it's Bob Holmes. Again, I love Robert Holmes. The man is such a talent. I wish I could have met Bob Holmes just so I could have told him how much I adore his Doctor Who work. I always wondered if he ever wrote for Blake 7. I haven't, you guys know I'm only about 7 episodes into Blake 7, but I wonder if I have a Robert Holmes Blake 7 episode in my future, since so much of the cast and crew of Dr. Classic Who and Blake 7 bleed over into each other. I wonder. I hope so. I don't know, but I hope I get some Robert Holmes Blake 7 episodes. That'll be a treat for me. So I would definitely keep that. I hate to lose Underworld. Underworld, if Revenge of the Cybermen's didn't exist, I would call Underworld the underrated Tom Baker story. Because I do consider Revenge of the Cybermen to be the most underrated story from Tom's era. Underworld's right behind it, though. Underworld, I feel like, gets a lot of crap when the only problem people really have with it, I think, is the bad CSO. Which, yeah, the CSO looks a little rough a lot of times with the caves. I mean, let's be fair, though. The fact they even managed to do that, that kind of blue screen stuff wasn't really done much back then. And plus, I think it coming out in 78 right after Star Wars really hurt it. I think if this season had come out a year earlier, before Star Wars, I think it would have fared better. But with, when you're seeing this bad CSO right after seeing Star Wars, it's just not doing Underworld any favors. And I feel like people overlook the excellent model work. I've gone on about this at the channel many times, but episodes 1 and 4, the model work that's used for those episodes is some of the best model work in classic Doctor Who, period. It looks good. I love when the ship rises out of the murk and you see like the steam coming off of it. It has some very dynamic shots. Dynamic for classic Doctor Who shots. Everybody praises that opening shot from Trial of a Time Lord, which is a fantastic shot with the ship, with it panning around and the TARDIS getting pulled in. It's an amazing, amazing shot for classic Doctor Who. Very impressive. People acknowledge that, whereas I feel like Underworld has some really excellent model work like that as well. And it just doesn't get remembered because all everybody always remembers is the bad CSO. I get the story's not for everybody, and the story's kind of middle of the road, to be honest. I don't dislike it, but it is very middle of the road. Jason and the Argonauts, you know what I'm saying, kind of thing. The Argonauts kind of thing. And then I like how it kind of fleshes out Time Lord lore a little bit, with the Doctor kind of explaining why the Time Lords have their non-interference policy. I enjoy that. Very underrated story. That being said, I would sacrifice it, mostly just because of its reputation, and mostly because I would rather have the Sunmakers. So I would give up Invasion of Time and the Invisible Enemy very, very easily, and much more begrudgingly Underworld. personally. It's just the other stories are better. I have to have Horror, Fang Rock, Image of the Fendal, and the Sunmakers. Ooh. Oh, I'm going to have diabetes before I know it. Season 16. Well, I'll bet no one knows what the first one on that list is going to be. I'll give you a hint. It's actually written by Robert Holmes. Now, I'm going to give a minute, because most of you know the only story written by Robert Holmes that season. Actually, I take that back, because 2 stories are written by Robert Holmes that season. Let's just say it's the squid one. That's right. The first one I would give up would be Power of Prowl. Now, I'm going to pause for a moment to give you a second to pick yourselves up out of your chair, or, pick yourself up off the ground back into your chair, or, maybe clean off your monitor, because if I said that while some of you were sipping on something, you probably spit it out all over your monitor, because I'm sure that took a lot of you by surprise. But most of you do realize that, if I did an Armageddon video saying, what if you only had to sacrifice one story from each Doctor, the 4th Doctor story, I'd be like, take it, would be Power of Prowl. It's a cruel world where I have no episodes of the Power of the Daleks, but I have all the episodes of the Power of Prowl. It's not fair. So I would definitely have no problems going, all right, Power of Prowl, there you go, take it. After that, it does get a little trickier. I would probably give up the Androids of Tara, which I like well enough. And then, as much as I don't like to, I'd probably give up the Stones of Blood. Even though it certainly doesn't deserve it. I would keep the Rebus operation. I never get that right. The Rebus operation and the Pirate Planet, because, well, quite frankly, those are my 2 favorite stories of the season. And I can't give up both Robert Holmes stories. And Pirate Planet's Douglas Adams. And I think they're both very good stories. I would keep the Armageddon factor, just because it is the season finale, and it does wrap up this seasonal arc, and it is 6 episodes. I feel like you need to keep it. Even if I do think Stones of Blood is a better story than the Armageddon factor, I do just think it is. And I hate to lose Stones of Blood. It is a very good story. And I know there are some people who would much rather keep Stones of Blood than Armageddon factor. I feel that. But since it is wrapping up a seasonal arc, or as much as classic Doctor Who really did seasonal arcs anyway, I do think I would keep it. So the first 2 stories and the last story are the ones I would keep, and the 3rd, 4th, and 5th stories are the ones I would sacrifice for this season. And rounding it up with season 17, because we do have to keep in mind that season 18 is an 80s season, so we will get to that in a different video. But season 17 is pretty easy for me. I would probably sacrifice Nightmare, Creature, and Horns. I hate to do that because I enjoy all of season 17. Season 17 is probably Tom's most underrated season, possibly. And I knew when I did the It's Armageddon, where you had to sacrifice one season from each Doctor, I knew one of the one a lot of people would be picking would be 17. I just knew. I even mentioned that. I think right when someone first posted in the comments, they posted season 17, and I was like, don't feel bad. I'm sure I'm going to see a lot of season 17 in the comments. And it was. There was a lot of season 17 in the comments. I think a lot of people were like, it's a shame because we love City of Death, we love Shada, but it's the other stories. And I get that. I get it. I know the budget wasn't there. They really went the tentpole direction and really put a lot of money into Shada, which is really frustrating considering what went on with Shada. And, of course, a lot of money into City of Death, which is great. I think most people will acknowledge City of Death is a phenomenal Doctor Who story, and it is. Very, very highly regarded. I would have to keep Destiny of the Daleks. I like it. It has such a strong rewatchability for me. I don't know what it is, but despite being kind of a middle-of-the-road story, because the budget does let it down a bit, and Douglas Adams doesn't quite seem to have the perfect grasp of the Daleks, to be honest, but it still has a strong rewatchability to me. My least favorite of the season, probably Nightmare of Eden, but I like it. It's good. It just doesn't quite engage me as much as the others. I hate to lose Creature from the Pit, but again, when you're having to sacrifice half the season, it just doesn't live up to the stuff I need to keep. And the same thing with horns. I love Horns of Naimon just for its silly camp fun factor. But even Shada, I feel like I have to keep because Shada is so good despite being half animated. And that's, I have a feeling, is going to be a huge factor with people, is just the condition of Shada. But I feel like it's an important story. It's a good season finale. The location work looks gorgeous. And it really feels like a Doctor Who story. Of course, I have to keep City of Death as well, because it's City of Death, you know, one of the greatest Doctor Who stories ever made. So it pains me to get rid of those, especially horns. I hate losing horns. But I just feel like Shada's more important, despite its half-animated state. So I would keep Shada, Horns of Naimon, I would keep Shada, City of Death, Destiny of the Daleks, and I would sacrifice Nightmare Creature and Naimon. So I want to know what you think of my choices, and I want to know which stories you would choose if you had to sacrifice half of the stories in 70s Doctor Who seasons. So comment down below, and let's talk about it. Oh, I feel like I'm just running out of steam today. You know, I just... Take a deep breath, bro. I want to know what you think. Comment down below. Don't forget to click the like button and the subscribe button as well. I also have a Patreon if you would like to support me on that. Don't forget that patrons do get exclusive videos every Sunday. The $5 tier getting the first 2 Sundays of the week, and the $7.50 tier and up getting all of the Sunday videos as part of their tier choice. I don't do Sunday videos here on YouTube. Those are exclusive to Patreon. I also want to give a shout out to Colin Coney and Sam Venning. I appreciate their support, as I do the support of all of my patrons. I also have a P.O. box down there as well, and a link to my Amazon wishlist and a link to my Amazon UK wishlist as well. Most importantly, thank you for watching.